Welcome, everyone, to the fourth episode of the Deadliest Warrior podcast. I am your host today, Craig Taylor.
Hi, I'm Matt Davis.
I'm Lucas, as always, from my own channel, Green Dice Games.
And I'm Brendan Scullard. They hired me on as a producer.
Yeah,
They gave me a good paycheck.
We got Brendan producing this episode, and joining us live remotely, we have our special guest,
Mike Dooley. They're not paying me. I don't know why no one told me anything about pay.
Mike is currently beaming in from Cairo Station, approximately 3,000 kilometers above the Earth's atmosphere, keeping us safe from the Covenant. We thank you for your service, Mike.
Back when I shipped out, they said this was just a myth, but now all these Mac stations up really feel special.
I don't know what they're talking about either. So, as you probably tell by the title, we're talking about I think this is the fourth episode of the show, Pirate versus Knight.
Yeah.
Highly contested show. There are a lot of strong feelings about this show, and this kind of leans into probably our icebreaker. I wanted to ask, what do you guys remember about watching this episode for the first time?
So when I first watched this episode, like hearing about it, I was like everyone else, where it's like, oh, obviously the pirate's gonna win. He has muskets. That's just gonna go right through the armor. Because I thought what everyone else thought, like armor is useless against ballistic weapons, like any sort of gunpowder. And then I watched the episode, and I'm like, that's not right. And then the episode, their tests, which aren't good, mind you, disproved it and switched me over to Knight. Everything about the test they did was like, oh, the Knight should win this. This makes no sense. And then doing research just confirmed my bias, like big time.
Yeah, I will say that this is a pretty heated episode, and I do not remember anybody being more pissed off than you were, Mike, at the result of this.
It just bothered me because, like, there's a running theme that Matt says this show is just scripted from the beginning. They choose the winner, and it's like their tests disprove their conclusions throughout, and they're still like, yeah, but we already picked the pirate to win, so the pirate's gonna win anyways. And it just drives me crazy because every time I watch it, I'm like, everything about the Knight stuff does better, and the pirate stuff is so ineffective, except for two weapons that are questionable at best. It's like, oh my god, I shouldn't care so much about this, but
I know that's
the theme of this podcast.
Isn't that the hook of this show? Is that like you should not care? You know what you're watching is stupid, but you're still like, God, why do I care so much about my guy winning? Just amazing that still, like, how many years has it been? Like 12 or 15 years later, we're still pissed off about this show.
Yeah. So do you guys have any memories of watching this episode?
Yeah, to me, it's outstanding that people think that a knight can beat a pirate when he can't. It's
whoa.
Can I add for the audience real quick? I want to set this up at the very beginning that Mike has always been our resident Knight truther, that the Knight should have won. And Lucas, we all have a favorite warrior. I think yours is the pirate. You're currently sitting in our high-tech fight club right now with a pirate hat, a pirate flag, a rum and coke, a flintlock rifle, a cutlass, and a hatchet.
And the foam granado.
Oh yeah, and also like a little foam grenade thing that you keep calling your granado.
damn straight. Hey, it's no secret. It might be to everyone else who doesn't know me, but it's no secret to our friends here that I'm just a big fan of pirates in general. You know, I'm not anywhere near an expert or historian on pirates. I like the romanticized.
Neither's anyone on this show, so
you know, Jack Sparrow. Ever heard of him?
Captain Jack, Johnny Depp.
Well, we'll get into that. I guess I just want to introduce the warriors. Get right into it. So for the Knight, the stats, which are in and of themselves a talking point of this show. Normally, it's just an aspect of the show. Stats of the Knight, year 1423, which we will get into. I think it's the first time they put a year, which in theory I like because, you know, you get an idea of where they're fighting from. Apaches would have been nice because Apache are like hundreds of years.
Yeah, I like the inclusion of a year. I don't know about the Pirates year. Maybe Luke looked into that, but the 1423 I've found really strange. But we'll get into it.
I can't remember what they say in the actual episode for the year, but the golden age of piracy is like 1690 to 1730, roughly. Like what you're thinking of with like Pirates of the Caribbean era.
Yeah, which the year for the pirate, by comparison, is 1715. For the other physical stats, the knight is 5'11", 180 pounds, has plate armor, and gear is 70 pounds. Physically, the pirate is almost identical at 5'11", also 170 pounds, no armor, gear is 20 pounds, and the knight's loyalty is to France, indicating it's a French knight. And the pirate's loyalty is to money, which is one of the most useless things I've seen.
Money ain't useless. It buys happiness.
Well, I guess
This is like funny on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll ask this. With the loyalty to money, they talk about a lot in the show. Do you think that was actually factored into the sim?
What, that the pirate is just loyal to the money?
Yeah.
That
I honestly think that it is.
it might be in some strange way. That is, provided the sim is real.
What do they mean by loyalty to money also?
Like he doesn't have I guess they're trying to establish that the difference between a knight and a pirate. That's like a recurring theme in this episode, as they talk a lot about the knight's code of honor and how the knight is fighting for, his lord or for God. Right. And that the pirate is just a cheap, dirty thief.
And they do pick, I'll say, the skeeviest actor to play the pirate in the reenactment. It's like, it's kind of...
I tell you what, guys, I hate to break it to you all, but in post-feudal capitalist society, we're all kind of pirates in a little bit of a way.
I got it. I'll get into a little bit of the pirate history here, but they weren't exactly as portrayed as just these dirty thieves only in it for the money. There's a little bit of a history lesson there.
Yeah. I guess I'll get into the knight a little bit. Matt, I'll let you take this one.
Okay.
So it's a French knight.
Yeah.
Was there you think a good reason for them to pick a French knight, and was there significant differences with knights of different cultures?
So, okay. Knights.
All right, look.
Yeah. Knights all across Europe. And you also had versions of knights in the Middle East as well, right? With the Ottoman Empire. One of the largest conflicts that happened in the Middle Ages, you have the Crusades, and encompassing within the Crusades, you have the Byzantine and Ottoman War. So you had knights stretching all the way from England, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, all across Europe into modern day Turkey. And I guess the reason they pick the French knight, I mean, there really is no reason in particular, I don't think. It's just, I think the year they picked it was the 1423. The only thing significant I could find about that is that this is the year that the Treaty of, I might be mispronouncing this, but Amiens was signed, okay? And this was essentially just parties in France and England pledging their loyalty to King Henry VI, who was a baby infant at this time. Henry V had just conquered France and died. And I don't know why they picked France in particular, but I guess it's just because of the history that was going on that time between England and France, if I could take a guess at it.
Okay.
Makes sense that the knight loses and is from France.
Wow, that's dude. That is the funniest joke I've ever heard.
Been an English or a German knight.
I'll be here all day.
Starting out of the stats, we already start strong with just basic and correct stuff. One of the things is the Knight's allegiance is to France. In history, France really doesn't people don't pledge allegiance to the country of France until after the French Revolution, and it's when King Philippe takes over after he overthrows the restored Bourbon dynasty. I know this isn't a French history podcast, but that's when it's the king of the French instead of the king of France. So the knights their allegiance would be to the king of France, not to France. No one really cared to pledge allegiance to an area. They pledge allegiance to the king. That's just a minor thing that's right out of the gate.
Yeah, the idea of the modern nation state wasn't really around then. You had cultures and then you had areas, right? And people saw themselves, like Mike was saying, as a particular culture, not necessarily the idea of a nation state we have today.
Yeah.
Right?
Europe was just kind of a mess during that time frame. If it sounds like
It's called the Dark Ages.
Yeah. Then for the year, what I saw, the reason they went, I don't know the specific year. I couldn't tell you anything about 1420-30, but the 1400s is when like the full plate kit is really in use, and that's like the knight that everyone is familiar with. That's like the different connected joints, armor head to toe, and that's why they went with like 1400s. So that was actually a really good choice. I think it's the same with the pirates going with the 1700s, because that's like Lucas already said, the golden age of piracy in the Caribbean, and that's like your most famous pirate behind the Somalians.
Yeah. So, interesting bit about the armor and stuff, because leading into the armor, David Coretti, who we'll get into the experts in a second, calls the knights the green berets of their time. And this is a new I think trend. Then immediately after, David Hernandez calls the pirates the original Delta Force.
I'm so happy you brought this up. This is one of the first notes I took. That phrase makes no sense at all. I mean, I guess a little bit that like knights are highly trained.
What kind of point do you think he was trying to make? Like, what do you think was it? Like, what was he trying to make?
I have an idea. So I think what he was trying to say, because I took some notes on what a knight is. Okay. And I just want to establish that real quick, because I have a snapshot of it, right? Knights were essentially like the military class of a feudal society. They served like their liege lords. Some people served the church, right? You were a servant by definition, right? And the role they served in feudal society is essentially the role that like a modern police force and military force serve, right? Like, so the military and the police, loosely speaking. I think what he's trying to say by saying they're the modern Green Berets is that they were like the top of the line, right? These guys could afford the best equipment. They were the best trained because they'd been training since their youth. For a lot of them, they're born into a family that is a knight family, and they train their whole lives, and then they get knighted at some point. They get their equipment, and they're a better fighter than like your regular peasant. That being said, I think that's what he's trying to say. I think it's a terrible comparison. Knights are comparable to either cops or like, I guess, modern, like the officer class in the military.
So if you think of like this in a video game sense, because that's probably what they were thinking about, the knight is a heavy cavalry. Like that's, if we're thinking about all the different things that would be in a medieval battle, all the knight is just someone on a big horse carrying a lance, using their horse to break up spearmen or archer formations. By comparison, a Green Beret or special army special forces, they drop into countries, and we'll go more in detail about this, but they drop into countries and overthrow governments and make guerrilla insurgencies. Knights didn't do that at all.
Right. Yeah. So maybe not a fair comparison. Basically, I think what he maybe meant was the knights were really good and the Green Berets are really good.
Yeah.
Like,
I have a question. You said that, I know it's like a trope, but did anyone look at, do you actually have to be born into like a knight family, knight, like, is that you can't start as a peasant and become a knight like Henry of Skalitz from Kingdom Come Deliverance?
It's difficult. Like if you were to prove like yourself heroically in a battle or like a tournament or something. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but in the country of Westeros, Sir Bronn of the Blackwater was knighted after the Battle of the Blackwater. It's a real event that actually happened. Look it up.
Yeah, don't forget about Sir Paul McCartney. He wasn't part of the elite class.
Look up Henry of Skalitz. It's a really good story. His parents were murdered and he becomes a knight.
Hey, no spoilers. Okay.
That's at the beginning, 30 seconds in the game. So
one minor point before we move on to experts. After shoving a crossbow bolt into a fake skull, Max says that he had to modify the sim for black powder weapons. Did they not tell him that they're going to have like modern infantry on the first season? Like, what do you mean you had to modify the sim? I think it's just a cool phrase.
Yeah.
I think so much of what comes out of Max Geiger's mouth is bullshit. I don't blame him.
I think between Viking, Pirate Knight, Mafia, Yakuza, in Green Beret Spetsnaz, he says that phrase in every single one of those episodes because it's a slow escalation of like how savage the weapons are. Like you're getting in from black powder to like into modern firearms. And I think every single time he's like, oh, wow, this like History Channel's Greatest Battles of Rome was not built for that.
But he stays confident, and that's what it's about. He puts on this fake, yeah, well, I'll have to modify the sim for that.
Yeah, I like to imagine every week he just totally recodes the sim. And he's like, all right, we're going back to Ancient Wars after this. And he's like, Max, we're doing Green Beret versus Spetsnaz. And he has to rebuild the entire sim.
And by the sim,
funny.
You mean the Deadliest Warrior game, which is the sim. That's my theory.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So moving on to the experts, and this will be a very quick segment. Sometimes you get a snake blocker. Other times you get a David Coretti. So it's a David Coretti episode. So David Coretti, starting with him on the night side.
I wrote one word for David Coretti and it was actor.
Yeah. He is billed as a medieval combat expert and an army veteran, which I don't understand how that's relevant. No offense, Mike, but I think it's just trying to get some extra points from the Spike TV crowd. His IMDb shows a few minor acting credits. None of them are medieval related, and seemingly all info about him online is Deadliest Warrior related. Anybody find anything else for David Coretti?
I found one thing just because I was curious for the heck of it, whether he was an army veteran or not. Could not prove it, but I found his Staff Me Up profile, which I guess is like a ghetto LinkedIn. Yeah. And he lists that he was a veteran in it.
Is that military LinkedIn?
Yeah, they don't make any wild claims when they say he's an army veteran. They don't claim that he's special forces or ranger or airborne or anything like that. Yeah. Anything that anyone would care about stolen valor. Like, you can be in the military and clean bathrooms your entire career. So just claiming veteran status really isn't that all that special.
I believe him.
They asked him like, what were you in the army? And he goes, sorry, guns, that's classified.
Yeah.
I bet it isn't.
Yeah. Moving on to Josh Paw, who reminds me of Sid from Toy Story. He is listed as a competitive sword fighter and combat historian, and he has a few stunt acting roles according to IMDb. Anybody find anything else on Josh Paw?
I wrote stunt actor. That's exactly what I wrote.
He looks like a guy who works in medieval times.
Yeah. But just is super into knights and talks about it with people that don't care.
Yeah.
I'm going to cover this later a little bit too. I think this is some of the worst selection of expert, as in they obviously have they were just explained how to use these weapons 30 seconds before they ever use them. I'll get especially into that with the pirate Blunderbuss, where they obviously have no idea what they're doing. Like, they obviously have not fired that many black powder weapons.
The flail and Morningstar and the halberd, which is also a poleaxe. We'll get into that.
Oh yeah, we'll get into all of the knight's weapons. I found.
Yeah,
I got news for you, folks.
Yeah, but they look like complete goobers running those, and then you see with the sword test, they just cut a pig in half. There's no other sword test, so it's like, are they really experts?
Yeah,
they go even.
So they swing it like a baseball bat at a pig carcass.
Yeah, but not to put the cart before the horse. So let's get through these experts because it's going to take another minute. So moving on to the pirate, we have Michael Triplett, who I can't explain why. It just seems like he'd be a pirate expert. Like, you look at him and that's what you think. He's billed as a historical armaments maker and a pirate's weapon master, which is pretty rich considering what happens later in the show. He doesn't know how to hold a blunderbuss. And I found zero information, like barely any Deadliest Warrior related information about him. So I assume that's what happens to everybody else.
The only thing I'll note is that Michael Triplett and the other pirate guy, whose name I didn't write down,
David Hernandez.
Yeah, David Hernandez. I noticed one little funny thing on their IMDb pages that they both starred. Is it like a History Channel special called The Last Stand together? It's about the Spartans.
Yeah.
So I guess we need to search that up and find it on YouTube and see somebody tell us so they can spot the Michael Triplett in the Spartan outfit.
Send us the screenshot.
All I got from Michael Triplett is that he reminds me of the character in the movie Dodgeball, Steve the Pirate. He's just that guy around who acts like a pirate for no reason.
Yeah. That's
like
probably
Steve
what subconsciously I thought, like, You didn't realize it, but your brain did.
Yeah.
Like that was Michael Triplett.
I got like just off his IMDb, he was in Battle BC, Library Bards, and Poe. If you ever seen or heard of any of those movies, let me know.
Yeah.
And then David Hernandez, he was in The Whisper in the Darkness, Love, and Better Criminal. If you've seen and or heard of either any of those, let me know.
Actually, I believe he was a producer on Love.
That I think I did write that down.
Yeah,
actually.
so-
So he
All
was a
right,
producer.
let's move on before we lose the whole audience here.
I'll mention that with David Hernandez that he is listed as a pirate combat expert. I think that they say that he teaches pirate tactics, which I don't know what that means. I Googled if there was such a thing, and there was someone's workout program for like the army that was based around pirates, but surely not based on like actual pirate tactics and fencing for little kids. So I don't think that that's real. And he is the most prolific actor on this episode in that he has 14 acting credits instead of like 8. That's it for David Hernandez. Thankfully we're moving on to the meat of the show. So
Well, should I do my pirate history lesson real quick? Get that in there.
Mike's got a Subway delivery. Mike, what's your
What'd you get?
what's your Subway order?
Thank you, Subway. Not sponsored this show. They did not sponsor, but they gave me an Italian footlong sub and a Diet Coke. The podcast is now pious, so we can continue.
Yeah.
Hey, I just want to mention Subway. I know you're in need of a new mascot.
And the new spokesperson.
Mike is available.
I am available, and despite the mustache, I have no shady background, so you know.
Right. Yeah.
Subway, eat fresh. Moving on to the meat of the show, special weapons. So they start with special weapons, and I guess I understand why, because there's a very awkward structure in this where it's not very clear special weapons, short range, long range. It's like they kind of throw shit around because there's so many different weapons for each warrior. But start with the Morning Star. The stats are, it is 3 feet long, 8.4 pounds, and made of wood, steel, and iron. So to kind of kick off the history, I guess we'll start with you, Mike. Is this even a Morning Star?
Kind of. The Morning Star is more in reference to the ball at the end, that circular ball and the spikes. That's what I got. So you can also have like a Morning Star just mace, which it would be like a dick with the ball at the end, like any other mace. So the big thing with this is flails were not really actually used. They may have been used a little bit near the end of the medieval period, more like a prototype weapon. Like sometimes you see in games and movies when the military is testing out new weapons or doing bids on new weapons, these like weapons start appearing in fiction. One of the things, if anyone remembers the XM8, that started appearing all over fiction and it never got picked up and it's just forgotten. I think that's the thing with the flail, is it got like picked up in a lot of fictions. One of the things I saw was like in Marco Polo's travels, they have a lot of pictures of it. They really didn't use the flail at all. It's a cool weapon, but at the same time, it's just dangerous, since if you hit a shield or something armored, it can recoil back at you. And the knight has much better weapons at combating other armored people. And then while they're on a horse, it's completely useless to them because of how close they would have to get compared to their main weapon, which is ironically not in this show at all, which is a lance. It's one of those instances of like, it's cool, so they brought it, and that's about it, even though the knight really didn't actually use it.
If I could add a couple things, Mike was pretty much right. What we're shown is called a flail, and a flail is denoted by a bludgeoning object attached to a handle via a chain. A Morning Star technically is what Mike mentioned, like the mace version. It's a spike ball attached directly to a handle, more similar to a mace or a club. And Mike is also correct in that there's a lot of debate among historians how much flails were actually used. I think one of the misconceptions in modern day that we have is because flails are in a lot of medieval artwork, and people think it's just because it's a cool, scary looking weapon, but that it's not necessarily. I mean, if you look at it, it's very impractical. So on YouTube, I'll give a shout out here. One video I found that was really helpful was by Shadiversity, and the video's named Overappreciated Historical Weapons, the Medieval Flail. And he just talked about like why the flail kind of stinks as a weapon compared to a lot of stuff, because you can't really control it. Like, it presents a danger to the user. And I noticed Max says in here, what makes this weapon so great is that they're so unpredictable. Like, he says that line, and I just think like you can argue that that is a hindrance because you can hurt yourself with your own weapon.
Imagine hitting yourself in the balls with that thing.
And also,
you're swinging it like nunchucks, like through your legs, and it comes up.
You can generate, like the whole point of a flail is to generate like spherical motion, right? Like on that chain. But one problem is that the energy of that motion is more likely than the energy you can actually generate with your body weight and your strength by like holding it and like you would do with a sword, bringing a sword down on someone where you're putting your whole body into it. The flail, you can't do that because you're swinging it and it's only so much as being generated in the swing. The only other two things I wanted to mention are about the test. First and foremost, they insert a silly sound effect every time David swings the Morning Star. It's like, whoo, whoo. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is something we noticed when we did a group watch. It was that Jeff straps a pressure sensor to the side of the ballistics gel head. And the first swing of the Morning Star, you can see in the slow-mo that pressure sensor goes flying. There's no way they collected any data from it. It just goes flying. So, go back and check it out when you're watching the episode. Watch this pressure sensor just go.
Yeah, I like the David who tests it. I think it's David. He's wearing that armor that makes him look like Junie from Spy Kids 3D, and so it was really that dangerous where you'd have to wear that realistically to use it.
If I'm just standing here holding this, and it requires me to be wearing all this gear, it's a dangerous weapon.
It's a dangerous weapon.
The thing I found about the Morning Star, the real one, not the one they use in the show, it was more commonly used by peasants. That there's like some debate. Whenever I looked it up, it just said, "Is this a peasantry weapon?" So I was like, I don't think knights actually use this at all.
Yeah, that's going to be a recurring theme in this episode. Mike hit the nail on the head that the knight had two primary weapons. Knight had his lance when he was on horseback, and then he had his sword. And knights did carry other weapons from time to time, like a warhammer or something, but for the most part, it was those two, the lance and the sword, that were the knight's bread and butter.
Yeah.
What Lucas was saying about the peasant weapons, I saw something similar where farming tools, getting the wheat from the shaft, like the wheat seed when you're trying to make flour, and it looks something like a flail. So I imagine like if you're a peasant and you're getting raided by a bunch of Vikings or marauders or whatever, and all there is that thing laying around, you're gonna grab it and start swinging around. So that could be where like people are like, oh, this ain't too bad at killing people. The one more thing about the flail, if you think about the knight who's always going to be on a horse because they're mounted, that's what knights are, mounted cavalry. That doesn't make sense on a horse. You don't really need a way to generate more force when you have a horse driving you.
Because you'd probably fucking kill your horse.
Just hit in the head.
Yeah.
Careful, Mike. You said the Viking word. You might get our producer fired up.
Yeah.
No comment.
Yeah. So one other thing about the test is the dummy's head is at like a 90-degree angle, and Max goes, "This is the hit that broke the spine." Like the head is like completely sideways,
Exploded.
Yeah. And also David Hernandez hits us with the classic.
I mean, you guys were hitting at half a man who wasn't moving. Do you have any armor to protect against this?
Exactly.
I got legs, I'd move. All you have to do is sidestep to either direction and you miss.
A knight isn't going to sit there and let you run away, which I know is in a pirate's fashion,
So what's your strategy against this?
besides running.
Well, no, see, you're thinking about running away. I'm talking about running around.
I would love to see a pirate move that fast. He would be the new world record holder for the 100-yard dash. He's not supposed to square off on you. He's supposed to scare you. He comes out of nowhere and he puts your brains on the floor when you're not looking. That's the whole point of the night's mission.
All you have to do is sidestep to either side, and he just missed.
It's a really good argument.
Which is particularly like, he says it a lot, and Dave Coretti is getting like legitimately pissed. Like, you can tell he's like, no, that's ridiculous. Which, to be fair, he has a point. This is the one weapon that is meant to be swung in an arc, so it'd be very hard to sidestep it compared to like so many of these other weapons. Like,
it's also just the same tired argument we always hear on Deadliest Warrior that, well, I'm not just going to stand there and let you hit me. It's like, does the producer tell them to say that line? Like, if they don't have a line to say, like, what is with that being such a recurring argument? Because it's so weak.
Don't even like the Green Berets or Spetsnaz use the argument, and they're using like guns.
I wouldn't just stand there while you shoot me.
We're mentioning the Green Berets too much. That is not for another couple weeks, gentlemen.
It's coming, folks. It's coming.
The bonanza.
So one thing we kind of forgot to go into the history of each of these warriors. Yeah. So we're going to take a quick pause on the weapons and kind of circle back. So we've been talking about the night a while. Lucas, can you give us a little background on the pirate sweater appetite?
Oh, yeah, I'm sensing some knight favoritism here in the room. We got to loop back to the pirates because we are here to drink your beer and take your rum at the point of a gun.
Dude, draw your cutlass into the mic.
Yeah, here's the cutlass for everyone.
Yeah.
That didn't sound as impressive as it did before.
Hopefully, let me give it one more shot.
Yeah.
Hopefully anyone can hear that.
We'll have to insert like a Deadliest Warrior sound effect. Like, that sounds cooler.
Shing, shing. We should put in like the wrong one. Like the.
I don't know if you guys noticed, that thing is almost identical to our broadsword. Almost perfectly same killing potential and everything. So
yeah.
Oh, hey, quiet! It's the pirates' time over here.
Tell us about the pirates, Luke.
All right, they honestly don't do a terrible history lesson on the pirates. I was actually surprised. It's one of the few like warriors that they give an okay explanation for. I mean, obviously they've been around in a ton of movies. They're very romanticized, but they. Matt's over here playing with the cutlass now.
Matt, unsheath the cutlass, and right by the handle it says China.
The feared China beard pirate.
Yeah,
it was from his ship.
It's real. It's authentic.
It's Chow Yun Fat and Pirates of the Caribbean 3.
Yeah. All right. So pirates most active in between like 16th, 18th century as privateers. What are those, you ask? Well, in 1243, Henry III of England granted the first letter of reprisal, which created privateers, or essentially pirates working for the government. But they were pretty much more like soldiers, just kind of privately employed soldiers, like mercenaries almost. And then, that lasted until 1856, which was the Declaration of Paris that was signed, which was privateering was made illegal. So 1243 to 1856, pirating was technically legal. Mike, did you want to interject here? With that Subway sandwich in your mouth?
Sailors. They were sailors. They used the term soldiers, and they were sailors. There's a difference. If you're on a ship, you're a sailor or a marine. If you're on the ground, you're a soldier. They were not soldiers. They were sailors. And it's just a point of contention. Yeah. They say this over and over again. And they're not soldiers. If you're trained on a ship, you're a sailor. And if you're trained on a ship to go on land, you're a marine.
Mike, they were the original Delta Force.
Hey, I'm curious, Luke. They do make the claim that like pirates, a lot of them were employed by like the Navy, like Mike was saying, that they were sailors and that they lost work basically. So they needed to find a way to make money. And so they used the skill they had.
Yeah, I can cover that here. During the 17th century, privateers were used pretty much in a giant conflict between England, France, and Spain. Kind of each government would employ some pirates, like, hey, go steal all the trade ships from the other guys. And that's pretty much where like the whole privateer like golden era was. And then, that kind of died off once that conflict ended. It was kind of resolved and all of them were fired. And these men who were literally born into this lifestyle, men and a couple women, born into this lifestyle, they literally knew nothing else. So they just decided to take up piracy essentially on their own and just pretty much do it for themselves. And that is what's called the golden age of piracy, the 1690 to 1730, where most of your Blackbeards, your Calico Jack, your Sir Henry Morgan are from. You might recognize them from the bottles of alcohol at the store.
Ever heard of him?
Ever heard of them?
Yeah. There's actually
Ever heard of them?
Jack Sparrow? Ever heard of him?
there's actually a very famous group of privateers called the Seven Warlords of the Sea. That was for Mike and Lucas.
If those pirates were fighting, then I'd say those pirates would win. But these ones are just jokes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what killed the pirates? Essentially, they took up their arms on their own, and everyone kind of got sick of their bullshit after a while. So everyone kind of increased their naval forces towards like the late 1700s. Just kind of like a lack of. They used Nassau, I believe, is the island as like a home base, but it kind of fell apart. They really had like no safe place they could hang out, and pretty much all the notable pirates were killed or captured or executed, and it kind of just dwindled down. Technically, privateers were used until 1856, which I thought was pretty late, longer than you think. But by that time, it was dwindled down to very few people.
You said 1886?
1856.
56?
Is whenever privateering was made officially illegal. So there might not have been any privateers left, and they're just like, hey, we should make this illegal.
But they do live on as the ugly stepchild of Pittsburgh sports.
I have that written under fun facts that we have a losing team called the Pirates.
As you guys may know, our fight club is based in the beautiful, beautiful steel city of Pittsburgh. And the Pirates are one terrible sports team.
If you need to know how historically bad we are, we had like 10 first-round picks or something in the draft. That was like, this week. So
yeah. I got some little fun facts.
One of the things the experts keep on claiming is like their like special forces lineages to pirates, like the Delta Force in particular. So I was like, I just want to look up this claim, and everything I found about the mentioning pirates in the American military was the American military killing pirates, Barbary pirates, the Marines. Like when we first get the Marines killing the Barbary pirates, shout out to Lucas, and then the only other time is Navy SEALs killing Somali pirates, which we'll get to both of those groups later in this podcast.
Yeah, season 2.
So, that's their lineage, is just killing pirates.
Yeah. Delta Force, correct me if I'm wrong, is like the selection of the elite members of the U.S. Army Special Forces. How that in any way relates to pirates? Like, I thought Knights relating to Green Berets was stretching it. Like, how that in any way those two things are related, I have no idea.
I don't know what it is with people in the mentioning Delta Force, because it doesn't technically exist. There's no way when you're in the military to like look it up and try to like become a part of it. It's you get picked if you're in special operations for any branch of the military and you're really outstanding, you get drafted, but there's no information on it. There's no way to like know about their history. I mean, like we know they exist, but no one claims like there's not an official like SF, like the Marine, like MARSOC, Navy SEALs. We all know they exist, but like Delta, it's just weird. This guy claims lineage to Delta Force, even though like where are you going to look this up? Like no one has written an official history.
Mike, that's called plausible deniability.
It's called arguing like a 7th grader. No, they're like Delta Force.
Yeah. So let's move on to the night. Do you want to give us...
we did a pretty good history on the night. I think Mike's really covered their role as a soldier, that they were heavy cavalry, and I covered their role in society as basically the military caste, serving the lords and the church and all that. I don't know how much more we really need to go into it. They were a staple of feudal society. It's hundreds of years. I mean, y'all can research it.
Do one more quick thing. There's a part where the narrator mentions that the knights have fought through 9 crusades and 1,000 years of war, which is a really interesting sentence, since if you just Google crusades, there's 5 of note. Unless you break up the first one, which there's like the Peasant Crusade and different waves of the first crusade, you can maybe stretch it out, but there's like 5 crusades.
Yeah, I found it interesting that they kept mentioning the crusades in this, and they even show footage of knights like Templar fighting Turkish people. And you can tell they're Turkish because they're wearing like turbans. I should call them like Ottomans, because that's what they were at the time, the Ottoman Empire. The Crusades happened from 1095 to 1291. And we have specifically been told that this is a knight from France in 1423. That knight is not fighting in Israel.
That might be the knight whose loyalty is to money.
Yeah, right. Yeah. However, I will add, to give the show a break, which I shouldn't, but I will. The Byzantine-Ottoman War was going on at this time still, and this was a year that the Turks in 1423 actually did invade Greece, part of Greece that they didn't already control. Maybe the show is mentioning that, but I don't.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
My guy's buried treasure.
Yeah, I want to.
That's a myth, by the way.
I want to get to the Granado, Craig.
Yeah.
yeah. So let's move back to the weapons. Where are we at? Okay. Well, also with plate armor. So they kind of introduced plate armor in a weird way in between flail and the Granado. I guess because it's a very important part of all these tests, because it's like, can the weapon of the pirate penetrate the knight's armor? So it makes sense that they introduce it immediately, even though it's a little bit awkward.
Yes, it can.
So it's kind of a special weapon. Josh Paw calls knights the first tanks, which they're the first of a lot of things. But I kind of wanted to ask you, Mike, in the knight's time, how was anyone actually ever able to penetrate the armor? Because it seems, even with guns, very hard to get through.
A lot of the weapons that get through armor are designed around the use the knight's strengths against them. So a lot of the weapons are like the Halberd, which is not what we see in the show. The Halberd looks similar, but it's much bigger, a much bigger stick, and a similar like thing at the end. And it's using the knight's momentum against them. So the knight's galloping full speed at you on a horse, and they're just going to spear themselves on your Halberd. So you'd have a bunch of spearmen lined up in a box formation, similar to a phalanx or how you see people using muskets in like the pictures of Revolutionary War, that same box formation with those spears. And like if a knights try to charge straight on that, they're just going to get impaled on those spears. And another thing is a lot of bludgeoning weapons, heavier stuff to just like concuss the knight or dent the armor in. Because it doesn't matter if a hammer goes through your armor. If it does enough damage to heavily dent it, probably going to rock your brain. And then a lot of things is the English longbowmen would just like, if they could get a knight off their horse, they would just like four of them would gang up, knock the knight on the ground, and just start stabbing him everywhere in his like the joints. And there's a whole sword fighting style. The name is weird, so I didn't even bother trying to remember it, so I didn't even try to like mispronounce it. Designed around where the knight will hold near the tip of the blade, and they'll poke towards weak spots, being like your hand, your armpit, your neck, and try to jam the knight sword through that. And there's also another sword fighting style where they'll hold the blade instead of the handle, and they'll use the pommel as almost a warhammer. That's if the knight's off their horse and they're just one-on-one fighting. But mainly the infantry was going to use big spears and use the horse's momentum against them, gang up on the knight. And then with archers, it was a matter of luck, because you have like hundreds of archers in a formation. They're all firing their arrows. There's a chance that one of those arrows is going to get lucky and find a weak spot. Up until modern rifling, all ranged weapons were used in a sense of they don't need to be accurate. We have to throw enough at them to like beat the odds to get lucky with a kill.
That makes sense. A lot of their weapons are designed around getting through armor, which makes it kind of an interesting matchup, and unbelievable that anything besides the guns get any kills. But moving on to the Granado. So the stats of the Granado aren't really of note. 1 to 4 inches in diameter, 1 to 2 pounds. It's made of a clay pot, shot, and gunpowder. So Lucas, can you give us some history in the Granado?
There was some debate in the air between our group whether the Granado was completely real or not, or whether just something. It is absolutely 100% completely real. I actually lived off of right on the coast of North Carolina, where the Queen Anne's Revenge was found, which was Blackbeard's ship. If you want, it's off Fort Macon down there.
Blackbeard, ever heard of him?
24 have actually been recovered from Queen Anne's Revenge. They were made hollow balls. Essentially, most common was like an iron ball, and it was just filled to the brim with black powder. It shoved a fuse in it and put a cork in it. Very primitive grenade. Very barbaric, but they did use them. They used them to terrorize ships before boarding. They were created as early as the 51, Matt.
Wait, Lucas, you're telling me that the balls were empty?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Don't mind me. I'm just giggling over here. It's nothing to do with you. You keep going.
I told him a funny joke.
So they were hollow balls filled with gunpowder with a fuse put in. They could be improvised with gourds also. Nice. There was a reference that you guys will not get.
I would put it in the edit, but I think we'd get in trouble.
They also use smoke grenades. Also, they very commonly use the axe to create holes in the deck of the ship and feed the grenades through to kind of attack the people below the deck. And they did very little damage to the actual ships. And they were just kind of used in like, the initial shock attack. Yeah, they actually used them and they were pretty effective. They would fill them with iron shreddings or glass also to just when it explodes, similar to a modern grenade where it just kind of flings the pieces everywhere and shreds people.
I did have one question. I'm sure there's like an answer for this. How did pirates how did you light a Granado? Were matches around back then?
I mean, they lit cannons and everything else too.
That's a good point. How did they just have like a cannon?
Just flint and steel.
But
didn't you see the reenactment where they just used a cigarette?
It's like
is that what he used?
it's like a blunt. I'm not. I was gonna point that
It
out.
looks like a cigarette.
I'm talking about because a cannon is one thing, but in like the middle of like I'm just picturing the knight charging at the pirate, and the pirate's like got a real quick light this Granado. Is he like
with his big lighter?
I know it probably does. That's not how it's done in the sim, right? But I'm just picturing like the pirate's like, oh crap, and he's like he's got his knife out, and he's like trying real quick to light the flint, light this Granado so he can toss it at him.
But speaking of the test.
Hold up. I got something real quick. They had something called, I just looked this up right now because I wasn't sure myself. They had something called a smoldering cord, which was a slow match that was able to burn for a very long time. And it could be used over and over again to light all the various different things because a lot of their stuff required lighting.
I had no doubt that they had a way to actually do it. I was just thinking,
I thought they all made it up.
Like, what's the practical way that you could light that in the middle of a 1v1, like in this Deadliest Warrior scenario, like a 1v1 combat where the knight is like 20 feet away, closing the distance quickly, and you have to like just kind of toss that grenade.
From what I've seen, because they used matchlock pistols too, which is where there's a slow burning fuse on the pistol at all times, and they constantly had something on them that was burning. But I feel like in the Granado sense, that's why it was used kind of like as a quick initial attack, because you'd probably have that ready to go. Like you light it and you're like, okay, everyone, we're going to attack them now, and you throw all those. Or you
Great point, actually. Yeah, that probably would be the first thing he'd deploy, and he'd like have time to get it ready, probably.
So onto the test, which is one of the most iconic tests in this season. Max has a manic outburst at whenever the Granado explodes. He completely flips his shit.
massive lateral lacerations. This guy is toast. That guy is toast. Everywhere armor is not covering.
Yeah.
Now, I think, Matt, you heard his story. I don't know if it was on the Aftermath. What happened during that test?
It's in some lost content, actually. So I do have I have the Season 1 DVD of Deadliest Warrior. And the Disc 1 bonus features, there is a Season 1 wrap-up Aftermath that's like a half hour. And it's got Barry Jacobson and Max Geiger on it. And Max Geiger tells the story about the Granado. He says it's like his favorite moment from Season 1. I guess they got to this gun range at like 4 a.m. or something like that to test this explosive. And so they were out there super early. They were super far away. And he said like when it all culminated and it finally worked. And mind you, this is the first like explosive they're testing on this show. This is the first thing that's not a sword. So when it blows up and does a bunch of damage, Max said it was like combination of his grogginess and his anticipation just like sent him overboard. He was like, it's my favorite moment of Season 1.
Yeah, I am glad there's context because you're just like, you're completely caught off guard by it. It's a fun moment. The Granado does absolutely no damage to the armored pig, and Josh Pop points this out, and Jeff just completely ignores him.
It looks like everything's pretty solid. Yeah, there's some dings and some dents. You know, it's a nice trick, but that's all it is.
That's some serious what we just saw.
Like he's like he says like, well, look at that pig over there. There's no damage on the armor, and Jeff's like, oh my god, look at this carnage. Like
this is such an interesting point because the narrator's like the Granado did no damage to the armor, and then the pig turns and you can see a hole, and all I can imagine is it's the same plate they've been using the entire time, and they shot the Blunderbuss before it because it looks like the exact same hole.
I noticed that after you pointed it out, Mike. Mike. And I think that is like, we can go back and check the footage. I think that is like just the same piece of armor they've already tested, and that's what that hole is from.
Oh, they constantly reuse things. The other thing I will say is those grenades did have some pretty good concussion come off of them.
I would agree.
So that's actually my next question. I think we'll bring in our physics expert producer. How deadly would that concussive force be?
I think it'd probably kill you.
Really? How close would you have to be for it to kill you?
I'd say about like 3 meters, like 15 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. I believe that the concussion blast from that Granado would be bad. Like
it is disorient at least.
Yeah, it is this explosive wave, and the steel plate would do nothing, I don't think, to protect you from it.
At that range, like the concussive, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. Even like a bomb suit, you're probably going to die at that close, just because of like the like Matt said, the concussive wave. But at the same time, I don't think a Granado is going to have the same concussive force as a modern, well, obviously modern grenade. And even a modern grenade, the concussion range isn't that big. I would have to Google it, but I don't know. Craig, just edit it in right now. Just edit in I'm editing the grenade range.
Don't be bringing up the M67 grenade. All right.
You know, look forward to that podcast because I'll tell everyone the story about when I threw a real grenade in my life. It's a good story.
In basic training or advanced weapons training.
Yeah. So edges to the Granado. My question for anybody who wants to weigh in: what kind of comparison is this?
It's
awful.
It's special. It's special weapons. I'll say this: I think the Granado is a great special weapon for the pirate because it's like the definition of a. It's not long. It's not mid. It's not short range. It is a special weapon that a lot of utility in the world of Deadliest Warrior. I think they just gave the knight the Morning Star as a special weapon because knights do not have as much variety as pirates because knights are, like Mike said, primarily heavy cavalry, and they're taking him off horseback, so he's just a melee fighter. He's honestly kind of a one-trick pony in this episode. He has a sword and a Morning Star and a halberd. How the knight decides in the simulation which he's going to use to dissect the pirate with, I think is kind of irrelevant, right? So I think they make the Morning Star a special weapon because it's a little more unique than a sword, but I 100% agree with the edge. Like, I'd rather have an explosive bomb to just throw than I would
flail
not,
that can kill you.
You swing it wrong and it kills you.
The Morning Star is like the kind of thing when you and your friends are like 12 to 14, which is the age you watch the show at and get really serious about it. And you go on like ninjawarehouse.com and like you buy you're like, oh, check it out, a flail. And you buy it and you swing it around at each other and one person gets hurt. And then it's like banned. You know, mom is pissed off. Like, oh, how did you get your hands on one of these?
Yeah.
It comes off as like a toy rather than like something that just
has actual utility.
Just carry a sword.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the edge before we move on?
I agree. That's my thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also agree. I think they over-exaggerate how good it is, but it definitely is one of the two weapons that can actually kill a knight.
Yeah, I don't know how you disagree. So moving on to long range. So we start with the crossbow. Stats are a bow span of 3 feet. It is 9 pounds. It is made of a wood frame and a steel string. David Coretti calls it the first sniper rifle, which I mean isn't like totally wrong, but it's like, okay. It's something that someone who, really. So why is it wrong?
I mean, it's just not.
It's a weird comparison.
So you can define a lot of things as a sniper rifle. A sniper is technically just someone that's shooting from hidden, being hidden. But like a sniper rifle to me is something that can clear out to like a mile, right? Accurately, something that's a really long distance rifle. And I guess you can say that medieval crossbows. You can say anything, right?
You could say that a bow and arrow is the original sniper rifle.
Yeah, exactly.
You could say the sling is the original sniper rifle.
Is the original sniper rifle. Like medieval crossbows were not that accurate. Do you want me just to get into the crossbow, Craig? I can tell you a little bit about it here.
The knights didn't use them, right?
True.
Right. Yes. So
true.
I want to get into this. Let me get into this. As we've already stated, knights were primarily heavy cavalry. They did not use long-range weapons. Long-range weapons were used in medieval armies, but knights did not use use them. I'm sure there's at least one example of one knight picking up a crossbow, maybe, but they didn't train with them. They didn't use that. They were considered unchivalrous. And they do even mention in the show that in 1139, the Pope outlawed crossbows.
Is that true?
That is true.
I wrote that down. Yeah.
I did double check that. So I had a couple other notes about the crossbow, if I may. The crossbow was the primary ranged weapon in the French military at this time, right? Like the feudal militaries in France, whereas the English preferred the English longbow. Advantages of a crossbow are that it's easier to train somebody on, and they're very powerful, because you mostly have some sort of pulley system or crank or spanner to help cock the drawstring back, right? To put the bolt in. Whereas with a regular bow, you have to be able to pull it back. Even with as strong as these English longbowmen could get, you're never going to be as strong as something as like a mechanical pulley can get back. And there are examples of crossbow bolts being able to go through armor, as well as English longbow being able to go through armor. The big disadvantage of a crossbow against a standard bow is that it's very slow to fire, because you have to like use a system to crank it back. I mention all this to say that's probably why they give the French knight the crossbow. They don't have any long range weapon to give the knight, so they're just like, hey, he's French knight, let's give him a crossbow because it's unique or whatever. That being said, the crossbow we see kind of has a little bit of the same syndrome as the Apache bow, in that the draw weight is very underpowered, it looks like. Yet David Coretti reaches down and cocks it back with one hand at one point, which is, I mean, they did make crossbows that you could pull back with two hands, but most of them were wood and metal in frame. And they required, I mean, you're talking about pounds that are, it's like 350 pounds upward, right? And a medieval peasant is just not benching that. So it's not a completely accurate thing as to what we see. They tested against an unarmored figure, so it doesn't penetrate a whole lot. Like that bolt would probably go through a person if it was like full power. But yeah, at the end of the day, crossbow, knights did not use it. So little bit of a cheat here.
Mike, you're a medieval peasant who cocks his own drawstring with his bare hands. Congratulations, but that's bullshit.
Congratulations, but that's bullshit. Yeah, Matt, it would be how much you could deadlift, not bench, because benching is so, as a resident gym expert, I need to correct you there. But
maybe that's how much you can't deadlift. That's how much I can.
Whoa. Checking you pirate shit.
So I'll ask you this question, Mike. Were there different types of bolts that the knight, well, I guess knight wouldn't use, but you know what I mean? Like, were there
medieval soldier would use? Yeah.
Did different bolts have different uses?
Yeah, I mean, even in modern day, we see different bolts for different uses, and it just depended on the situation. Usually in the show, you just see a really small head that almost looks like a training head. That is kind of useless because, like Matt already said, it would over an actual bow with an actual draw strength would over penetrate. So you would want more of a broad head to go in there and stick and just like rip it up if it went through, it's gonna rip it up and do carnage. Or it's like it's big enough where it's gonna get stopped because there's so much it's grabbing on so much stuff to slow down.
Yeah, when I was researching this, I did see bolt tips that were built. So a crossbow fires bolts, not arrows. I just want to make that clear. I saw bolt tips that were designed for punching through armor, and I also saw bolt tips that had like a hook design. So on the back, it was sharp as well, like facing the other way, so that if you got stuck in you couldn't pull it out. Very sinister. There's a reason it's kind of silly that the Pope banned that and not every other weapon. But, there's a reason like the Pope singled this one out in particular as like a really nasty little tool.
Now, if the person who had that hook bolt stuck in them got to a modern hospital, would they survive?
Probably, yeah.
Modern,
depending on where you got hit, right? Dr. Armand Dorian. I'm saying Dr. Armand Dorian might be able to save you, but
can I have my ridiculous moment where, I'm a veteran and I work in emergency health now. So.
Your Jeff DeMolin moment. Yeah.
So yeah, they could fix it.
Thank you, Lucas. The test, is a pretty standard test. The bolt goes in about 2.5 inches, and Michael Triplett this entire time during this test is just caressing his flintlock.
Yes.
In a suggestive way. So that
this test is probably one up there with just like questionable. So it's like, first off, the narrator says can pierce armor from 200 feet away. Immediately after, it goes to the chronograph. Jeff Damelin is like, yeah, it's from that velocity, it's about a 55 to 60 foot weapon. And I was just like, what? And then I looked online and I saw that most crossbows are putting out ranges like 300 to 350 to 400 yards, which those of you who are not great at math is almost 1,000 feet, depending on 300 or 400. So the fact that he says it's only a 55 to 60 foot weapon means they're using like a toy crossbow they got at like Dick's Sporting Goods that you give your kids so he can go shoot stuff in the backyard.
Here's a conspiracy theory. Do you think that the reason that the bow and the crossbow have low draw weights, do you think it's because they're indoors and maybe there's like an OSHA reason why?
I think it's a safety precaution, 100%. That it was a question for me when the Apache bow was really underpowered, because I was like, maybe it was just built incompetently. After seeing the crossbow, I don't think that's the case. I think it's built purposely to be like, because they have people firing these weapons that don't know, you know what I mean?
What
like,
they're doing.
I mean, Alan Tafoya probably knew what he was doing with a bow, maybe, but like Tetsuro Shigematsu doesn't know what he's doing, and the crossbow, David Coretti, this is the first time he's seen a crossbow probably, so
then just fucking go outside. I mean, I guess like
right.
If that's the hindrance, go to a range or something and have a full power. I think they end up doing that in later seasons, because most of the time with bows, you'll see them outside.
The thing with an arrow that's frustrating is it's not like a gun. Like, you could just go outside the Fight Club in the parking lot and shoot the bow at like 100 feet, because you don't have to worry about it like a rifle round that ricochets or flies over a hill or something, like, because it travels really far. An arrow's not gonna, you know what I mean? Unless you're arcing it up in the air, it's not gonna go that far. So
I was gonna get there whenever we got to mine. I think on this show, a big theme, they purposely underpower weapons to create more tension. I was going to get there when we get to the black powder weapons. If you look up real videos, I've fired black powder in my life. Matt, I'm sure you have before.
Yeah.
They use very small black powder loads, it looks like, on the show. They do the same thing where they kind of lower the draw weight on the bows. They also use very weak loads for a lot of their like black powder weapons. I think they purposely
sounds
do
like
that
you
because oh, got him.
Man, two ball jokes in this podcast.
But I think they do that purposely. They like limit the weapons that they test.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've noticed the trend with that too, obviously, because I said so. So moving on to the flintlock. Stats are, it is 19 to 25 inches, 2.5 pounds, and made of wood and iron.
The Flintlock Pistol.
Yeah. Lucas, I hand it to you for the history. Starting question. Did most pirates carry minimum 4 to 6 pistols?
That is romanticized because Blackbeard did carry 6. That is a fact. But most carried, maybe a couple, 1 or 2. There's many variances of the flintlock pistol. It was developed in France in the 1600s, so it came from the same place the knight came from. Hey. They commonly carried a couple, but not to an extreme. It was known to be hard to load and had about a 50-yard accuracy. Like 50, it's going to go past 50 yards, but 50 yards is about your accuracy range. And then 20 feet is kind of your point and click without aiming.
Yeah, these are not like modern rifles where the barrel is spiraled and you can shoot out to a distance. These are
they're
like
barbaric.
Yeah, it's like a mini cannon, right? Kind of.
Now, what I was really interested in is pirates are, to appease Mike, sailors. And they're on a ship, it's constantly raining, everything's constantly wet, and black powder notoriously struggles to go off whenever it gets wet. So I was like, what do they do to fix this? And it was actually amazed me that they had very little misfires. Essentially what they would do, they would use wax and cloth around the pistol ball. So it would protect, you could like fill the barrel up with water and none of it would get around the wax to the powder. And the powder in the pan was also protected by usually beeswax. They would put it kind of like, I have mine here for reference. This tray, whenever it was closed, they would put the wax around the seal and no water would be able to get into them, which I thought was interesting. But I'm going to take this moment here, flip my page in my notes. I'm going to take my turn to address the black powder versus armor debate because it's good. It's the hottest topic of this episode.
Yeah, I'll mention just real quick to cover the test itself. Michael says he's going to aim at the weakest point in the armor from like 2 feet away, and it still doesn't penetrate.
I do attribute that to the low loads, but I'll get into that in my little thing here. I'm going to shout out to various YouTubes here. I'm going to pronounce them wrong, but Grim, Taggerly, PBS did one, and Demolition Ranch, because I was really interested in the whole black powder versus armor debate. And so historically, plate armor worn from the 1400 to 1700 were in fact capable of stopping very early primitive black powder rifles. And these were called the arquebus, which was nicknamed the hand cannon. This was essentially the very first black powder pistol that they would actually take this, and when they would create new breastplates, they would sometimes test these against those arquebus at long range, kind of like as a modern day QA procedure. However, at close range, at about 25 feet or less, no matter what, it punched right through even the heaviest plates. And I watched a lot of tests. These are even with the more primitive stuff. I mean, we're talking they had guns made later in the 1700s, which were able to take bigger black powder loads and use 50, even like 64 caliber balls. And even on the Grim, he does a very good job on his YouTube channel where he takes a little more primitive black powder guns. And I think he even fires a blunderbuss at one point. And even he fires it at a pretty good yardage, like 30, 40, even 50 out. And it punches right through the plates that he has. Essentially, from what I could find in articles, is black powder is essentially the reason why they stopped wearing plate armor, because it just, it essentially just kind of made the plate armor obsolete. And the very first battle that I could find in recorded history was in 1503. This was the Battle of Ganola, and this was the first battle that was ever won by gunpowder. And there was plenty of plate armor there, and the gunpowder won the battle.
So you're saying if there was a bigger load, that it would penetrate the...
Essentially, yeah. I mean, if you, like my modern day one back here, even the ones they had back in 1700, you can pack those things pretty full with powder. The very first ones that they made, those arquebus, they couldn't handle as big of powder loads, and even those could punch through at close distance.
Yeah.
For the most part, Lucas is correct. Like most of the research I agree on. The thing I saw was that in most of my research, depending on the quality armor, it did in fact stop pistols for a long time. And that's why we see like breastplates. The knights or cavalry drop the rest of the armor, but the breastplate stays around all the way up into the Napoleon period and a little bit on beyond that. When there's like the musket, like the full rifle with the little bigger load is always going to go through the armor. But like the pistol was usually stopped, and that's why they keep the breastplate going around. And what a lot of I saw in my research is that part of the reason armor goes away is that the rifles are able to go through it, but also knights' tactics change a lot. They start using pistols themselves, and instead of going and spearing people with their lances, they start going up close, shooting and turning around, almost like if you know how Mongol horse archers work, they go up close to formation, shoot arrows, and then go back away before they can get speared.
Medieval drive-by, run up and blap, blap, blap.
Yeah, it really is like a drive-by. And them wearing full armor is no longer that necessary, because the armor's more to counter getting speared by all those, what we talked about earlier, those spearmen. So they don't need all that. Also, the arms, the helmet, the groin, all that stuff, all the legs, the armor's not going to be thick enough to stop the musket. Now, I saw some videos of nice, like high-quality breastplates that are able to stop muskets, but that's probably a rarity among knights, because you would have to be able to finance that yourself. And I doubt every knight, which all of them have to pay for their own armor, is going to be able to finance the best possible armor to be able to stop that stuff. So for the most part, yeah, the black powder kind of gets rid of full plate armor, but it doesn't completely make armor obsolete. And the whole idea they're trying to sell us is like black powder weapons equals the end of armor isn't true, because we see armor going all the way up into the Napoleon's period. It's a mix of, it's not as effective, but tactics also change. And with the Flintlock pistol, I don't believe that that's going to go through the knight's armor, especially when the knight's moving side to side. He's not going to just stand still.
Our experts disagree. So the edge is given to the knight, and I think their philosophy on edges kind of goes back and forth. If you look at the edge being in the context of the battle between these two warriors, that's fair because the flintlock in the test could not penetrate the armor. If you were talking about a street fight between two normal people, I mean, it's a gun. I mean, it's not that accurate, but it's a gun versus a crossbow. So I think this points more towards they're using the edge as in context in this actual battle. So if that's what we're going by, I agree.
Yeah, I would just say to the edge, like, because I wrote here, I really wish they had just tested the flintlock more against the armor. Like, they do one test, it bounces off, and they're like, well, that's it. I wish they would have done a couple shots. I know they probably have one breastplate, so they're like trying to like use
it too much.
Because I think Lucas does have a really interesting theory about maybe them underpowering the flintlocks, because we see them underpower some of these other ranged weapons. Most of what I saw is that flintlocks can penetrate. I think you and Mike covered it perfectly. In the context of this specific test, given what we're seeing, you have to give the edge to the crossbow, but I don't know as though the flintlock pistol test against the armor is super conclusive. Like what we see on the show, I don't know if I just wish they had tested it more, because this is the most important thing in the episode, in my opinion. They spend so much time talking about how the pirates are the Delta Force or whatever, but like this is what this battle comes down to. Like if the knight closes the distance, he's cutting that pirate to pieces. Pirates got to kill him with a gun or a grenade. And if the guns can't go through the armor, that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. That's what this whole stupid made up fight is built on. So I'm a little disappointed that they shoot the flintlock pistol one time and they're like, all right, it's useless, get it out of here. And that's all we see of it.
I think they use an underpowered, I think maybe from a distance, but if you were up close with a guy, which pirates didn't use flintlock pistols anywhere near as like a main weapon. It was like a last resort, some guys got you cornered, you pull it out and you get that one shot. I think at close distance, it would probably still punch through most. If not, it's also a 50 caliber ball getting launched at you at like probably like 1,000 feet per second. It's gonna hurt pretty bad and even give you some concussion.
Yeah, but it's like Jeff says, getting knocked on your ass, getting dazed. That's not what this is all about.
Yeah, but then he could pull
hell
out his sword.
Jeff.
Yeah, get him, Jeff.
I would rather have a flintlock pistol than a crossbow, me personally. So I would disagree, but I don't think anyone saw that. Didn't see that one coming.
One of the things that's not mentioned in the edge is the fact that the crossbow, even this shitty one that's not real, outranges the flintlock still, and that's not brought up in the edge. But I think I have to agree with like Lucas and Craig. I'd rather have a flintlock, and the knights even agree with that having a flintlock. They ended up going to flintlocks, and they never used crossbows, and they did end up using flintlock pistols. So yeah, I would even if it doesn't go through armor, it's still going to be more effective than a crossbow that's not going through armor.
The Blunderbuss.
Yeah, now we're on to the granddaddy, one of the deadliest weapons in Deadliest Warrior history, the Blunderbuss. So some stats on the Blunderbuss. We're on the mid-range, I should say. It is 32 inches long, so about, I guess maybe, I don't feel like doing the math on that. It's at least a bit longer than the flintlock. The weight is
under 3 feet.
Yeah. The weight is 10 to 12 pounds, is made of iron, wood, and brass. So, Lucas, I want to have you explain the history. And one question I had was, it's not that much bigger, I guess, than the flintlock, but it's a decent bit heavier. Is there any reason why it would be so much heavier than the flintlock?
Just essentially because it was capable of firing, it's called the prehistoric or whatever. Not prehistoric. The olden shotgun, the first shotgun. But, just essentially because that brass barrel was like a little mini cannon. And on average, they were loaded with about 15 pellets. So it was so much bigger and heavier, just essentially to accommodate a much bigger powder load and much bigger ammo being shoved into it. It was like a little bit more of a prestigious weapon. It was commonly carried by the naval officers of the time, and it was supplied to privateers. It was most widely used in the 17th century, and it functions close to kind of like a modern day muzzle loader. They applied the same techniques that I mentioned with the pistol, where they would seal it with wax, although it was a little bit different because they would load it in a different order. They would load the powder, then a wad, then they would put the balls, which was usually about 15 lead balls, and then a piece of paper to kind of hold all that stuff in there, so it wouldn't, you could shake it around and nothing dumps out. And then it was accurate at about 80 yards. And the guy I mentioned earlier, on YouTube, the skill, I forget his name.
Scalagrim.
Yeah. He fires a blunderbuss, and I was actually really surprised how effective, like at what range he was shooting. And it had about the same spread as like a modern day shotgun. And it had a very big bang, because the name blunderbuss, it actually comes from the Dutch words meaning thunder pipe, because it was notorious for just having like a really, really loud, like boom sound. And I don't know.
That's a funny name. That's also what your mom calls me.
Thunder pipe.
Oh, pirate loses again.
Dude, pirate. Now, look it up if you want. Watch some YouTube videos on people actually firing a blunderbuss. They definitely underloaded it on the show, where it kind of like watch like a real one fire. It's pretty intimidating to watch this thing. It's a hell of a weapon.
Yeah. So I guess moving on to the test. So they first test on an unarmored dummy, which is a completely pointless test because his opponent is covered in armor.
No shit. It goes through.
Yeah. And on the second test is the legendary misfire.
3, 2, 1. Fire in the hole! Misfire.
So,
Oh yeah.
The gun misfires, and then the night expert David Coretti schools the pirate expert and makes him look like an idiot and embarrasses him about like how he's holding the weapon.
This is my least favorite moment from this season, I think. Dude, black powder weapons, like there's like this stigma with them where they're, because you got to put the powder in the rifle, you got to put the little bit of powder in the tray, and there's this like stigma that they're unreliable and inaccurate. I would not even be shocked if they didn't fake this scene.
I guarantee you this is a stage scene.
Yeah.
You think?
I 100%, I'm so emotional I can't talk, think that this is a stage scene so that they can cover the fact that like flintlocks they're not like modern rifles, and that you can spill the black powder or the black powder can get wet or something and it doesn't work. I think they did it solely so they could bring that up. It's way too convenient.
It is.
It's way too convenient that it happens. And I'm like, and he's talking about like, oh, well, if you hold it sideways, the powder runs out.
That's not true.
Number one, that guy is a stunt act. He was not carrying around the gun, I guarantee you. They probably gave him that gun.
That is what that is for. I'm holding the model again. I am showing on the side of the tray. I think it's called like the frizzen. That is what this is for, to hold the powder in no matter which way you turn this.
Yeah, well, that, I bet you for their weapons test, like that guy did not load that at the bench and then walk up because he's a stunt actor. He probably doesn't know how to load that thing. They probably loaded that and gave it to him and had it all ready. So it's probably not his fault that it would have run out. I guarantee you, like, the prop master was the one handling that gun, and it's just way too convenient that it happens. I'm calling BS on Deadliest Warrior. They faked this misfire so that they could bring up a little bit of a...
I think that's a reoccurring theme, because a lot of the modern episodes where they're all using modern firearms, that happens a lot with guns that have stigmas for jamming.
The AR-15,
it's really convenient. You're in this controlled environment.
They do the fakest test I've ever seen for the AR-15 and the AK. You wait.
Oh, we will tear that
like
apart.
A rubber AR-15 in that episode.
Yeah.
Don't forget the M60 also jams, and that's another weapon that has a stigma for jamming. But it's like they probably are using brand new weapons with clean ammo.
Yeah,
it just doesn't jam.
Right.
My thinking that it's real is Michael Triplett does look really embarrassed. So that's why I immediately thought, this is real.
He is an actor, though.
He has an IMDb page. He's just a random guy.
He's like a stunt actor.
Wait till the IRA episode. The expert plays it off so dumb when.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You're like it'll make you a believer.
When you see that reliability test in IRA Taliban, if we have any viewers who are diehards, go watch right now the reliability test of the AR and the AK. It's 100% fake, and they use fake guns. They show different angles on the guns. When they're firing the AR, the bolt cover is closed because it's a fake model gun. And I just want to say, I would not put it past them that they faked this misfire just so they could bring up the fact.
I agree.
Yeah.
If they loaded that thing like an hour ago and then like shook it around and dipped it in water and then it misfired, maybe I'd believe it. But the fact that they just loaded it, handed it to him, and it misfires.
Yeah. This is Pirate vs. Knight. Okay. let's stay on
I'm back on the pirate. Like they just loaded that blunderbuss and handed it to him, and then it misfires.
Yeah. I just don't see how that happened.
Unless you didn't close the little hatch I showed you on top of the version. If you didn't close that, maybe it would dump right out, but that's literally what that is for, is to keep the powder in.
All right. Well, I'm convinced it's fake.
Max says he says in the aftermath for this episode that he used an algorithm for the misfire, like a random chance.
Like he fired it 1,000 times to see how often it would jam.
I guarantee you he did not put an algorithm in. No. Firing. I would bet money on it. Max Geiger, come on the show and correct me, but I bet money he did not put anything like that.
There's a great Max Geiger quote during this test where he goes, "It's a hand cannon, son." I had to pause my screen and laugh.
We got to put that on the sound.
It's a hand cannon, son. No, there was a myth with these two that they could be loaded with anything, maybe in a pinch, but it would damage it horribly. They were usually just loaded with lead, but there's like this big thing around like you could load them with anything, knives, forks, pieces of wood. That didn't happen that much.
So moving on to the Halberd. So the Halberd is 6 feet long, 5 pounds, and wood and steel. So give us some history in the Halberd, I guess, Matt.
Okay. So Mike brought it up earlier. What we see is not actually a halberd. It's a pole axe. Actually, it's a pole axe. It is important to note, though, because halberds are typically a very large axe face on one side, and they have like a hook shape on another side and then a large spear on top. And pole axes are slightly smaller, and you'll notice they have like a bludgeoning side on the other side rather than a hook. But the halberd was typically used for someone who's standing on the ground fighting someone who is on cavalry, someone who is on horseback. That's why it's so big. And
it's used to kill knights.
Yeah, right. Mike brought up earlier that you swing it up at a knight when he's on horseback and uses momentum against him. This is a recurring show. I don't think we've had one weapon so far that the knight actually really used. Knights didn't use halberds because it's an anti-cavalry weapon, and knights are cavalry. Imagine riding on a horseback holding a halberd, right? Like it's unwieldy. It's a two-handed, giant, 6-foot long thing. So knights didn't really use it. We see it tear apart a guy's a ballistic gel face. And yeah, I bet you it can kill you, but I'm kind of disappointed. The more research I did, I was so disappointed in this episode because knights are a warrior class and there's a lot of really cool weapons to pick from. And they chose 3 out of the 4 as weapons that knights just didn't use.
So, like Matt said, the halberd was not used by knight, but this thing is not a halberd. Knights did use axes, but it's going to be the same as the sword, where it's mainly going to be used dismounted. Because if you look at a lance, and it's just designed for impaling people, this thing has that spike to impale, but if you're on a horse and you try to impale them, it's going to get stuck on the person, and like you're really not going to want to swing this thing around on a horse. You're going to be wanting to on the ground, and you're going to be trying to fight another knight, and you want a better weapon to fight knights. In their main mode of a fighting horseback, they would never really use this, and it's just a lame pick. It just bothers me that they don't have the lance. Like, knights use lance. I guess their like ideas. The knight. It's the same way thing with the Spartan, where he's not fighting in the phalanx, and a Spartan would never fight alone.
Yeah. Well, it's also like how samurai were horseback fighters, and they just kind of take him off horseback to fight on the ground. That's what they're doing, because pirates didn't ride around on horses, so they couldn't. I guess they thought it was unfair. But judging by the results of the episode, it might have evened it up a little bit if they had given the knight a horse.
Might as well just give a pirate a ship with a cannon at that point.
I would say the ship is equivalent to a knight's castle more so than
but horses can't swim.
Right.
Pirates can't afford cannons.
Yeah, pirates couldn't afford cannons.
No, the genuine argument I'd have
they couldn't afford station wagons either.
Pirates used muskets, and they just completely skip over that. That was probably one of the more common weapons, is they just use regular muskets.
Yeah.
If they're using muskets, this wouldn't even really be a question. It would the pirate just wins 100% of the time.
Yeah. So as for the edge, I forgot to write it down. I assume it's the blunderbuss.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, okay.
I think the blunderbuss is probably the deciding factor of this entire. It's probably the most effective weapon. It's the entire reason the pirate wins.
It's up there with the twin hooks. And
it is. Yeah,
kills.
It's like very decisive weapon. Mike has something to say, so I'll just say real quick. I agree with the edge. It's a shotgun versus a pole axe edge shotgun.
So if they presented it correctly, like the way Lucas just so elegantly told us, it would, it's 100% it would be the edge. And it is, I still think the way they presented it is still the edge. It's just like, I don't know why they're going to make the pirate's most important weapon the reason the pirate wins and make it look like a joke. Like, this is like, as a kid, you're seeing this, I'm like, well, he's one out of 2 times he tries to use it, he's not going to use it.
Yeah.
So it's like,
that's a great point.
I think it was too effective, I think.
Based on what we see, it's like a 50% failure rate. It's like that pirate, again, he's got to use this gun from 10 feet away. If that thing misfires, he's dead, basically.
Well, I think they put it in the sim, and it probably got 700 kills, and you're like, all right, this thing needs a misfire or something. They cut it in half.
Yeah. So moving on to short range, we start with the broadsword. The stats are that it is 3 to 4 feet long, 4 to 5 pounds, and made of tempered steel. So I would be shocked if this was not a real weapon used by the knights. Michael Triplett says that the broadsword is designed to bludgeon. Is this true? And if not, what was the broadsword designed for? I guess we'll start with Mike.
No, it's a sword. It's designed to cut people. Yeah, a broadsword is a heavier sword, and you can see that this design of sword goes away with armor, because there's no sense of having a heavier sword that has more weight behind it to try to go through armor or do damage even if you don't cut. But it's still a sword, which is designed for cutting. If you want to bludgeon people, you're going to use a mace. It's, I don't know why he would say that, other than he's just an actor and doesn't know what he's talking about. There's probably something interesting about the swords used about knights. In the little bit of research I did, I really didn't find anything super interesting about swords, other than those 2 sword styles I mentioned, fighting styles I mentioned earlier, where they would use the sword, hold near the end of the sword, try to find weak spots, or flip it upside down and use the pommel, almost like a hammer. There's really nothing super interesting about the broadsword.
So it is a bludgeoning weapon.
And it's absolutely sharp and used for cutting.
There's sort of this contradiction with a weapon that the more famous it is, the less information there is about it. It was like that for the Yumi bow.
Dude, all I could think about was you reviewing the katana, where it's where do you even start? A broadsword, there are people that obsess over different kinds of broadswords. I mean, it is what you see. Comes in a variety of lengths. It is probably I'm just going to go out there, probably the most iconic weapon mankind's ever made, maybe, besides the bow and arrow. The sword.
Besides the AK-47.
Right, yeah, the AK-47.
It really peaked at the broadsword.
I was saying, iconic is unrecognizable, and I don't have much to say about the broadsword. I have a couple things to say about the test that's done and the edge, so I'm going to kick it over to Lucas.
Yeah, I dug pretty deep on the broadsword, because I was genuinely curious. I got a smidgen of history that it was usually about 30 inches long, 2.4 pounds, and it was actually developed and modeled. The ones that the knight used was developed and modeled after the Viking sword. Shout out to Brendan over there. It was double-sided because essentially they were covered head to toe in armor, so you were allowed to have that double edge without fear of it coming back at you because you were armored as well, which is why it was actually, name any military after like the 1700s that used double-edged swords, it kind of got phased out. It was replaced by the single-edge military swords because single-edge tends to be more durable and there's less risk of it injuring yourself also as armor was phased out. And the swords that the knights were given, I mean, that's pretty much like what you associate with the knight. It was their status symbol. Whenever they were knighted officially is when they were given that sword, and that was the sword they carried. It was kind of like a prestigious honor to have that, like, you made it, this is it, you have a sword. So that's just a little bit that I found on it. But yeah, you don't really, I mean, you really think about like anything today, a lot of military still carry swords and stuff too. They're all single edge, so pretty much all double edged swords have been phased out from that period on.
Interesting. So I'll get into the Cutlass next because if I'm not mistaken, they kind of test them alongside each other.
The whole thing is like 5 seconds long.
Yeah, for the swords. But stats for the Cutlass: 2 to 3 feet, 3 pounds. Made of steel. It's a cutlass. It's a curved sword. So it invented the word pyramid. So some history for the Cutlass. I'll take it to you, Lucas. And well, yeah, let's get started.
That's good because I got my little spiel on the double-edged sword, so I can roll right into it's what replaced it, which is the single-edged sword. Essentially, you know, it's the curved short sword, ideal for close quarters and combat because it had the hand guard, which a lot of militaries and a lot of the naval and sailors started doing to essentially just to protect your hand. Why was it curved? Just to create more surface area because, as I said, the armor was being phased out. So your goal, essentially, instead of wanting to stab anymore, everyone wanted to cut since there was no armor to block it. So that just increased the surface area with that little, with the curve there. And the reason, besides not having that second blade to come back at you, single edge blades, from what I could find, were a lot more durable, easier to repair. And they were pretty much just like cheap to make and required a lot less training because it was just only one edge. I mean, you just swing it at people. It's pretty, like, anyone could pick it up and use it. And I cut a pork chop with mine in a video recently, and I can guarantee I didn't have a pig carcass to test out my Cutlass here, so I tested it out on a pork chop, and I can attest to it's very easy to use.
Yeah.
And it had kind of like a status symbol with it because a lot of naval officers, a lot of military people, and a lot of fearsome pirates carried it. Back in the time, it was a very intimidating sword. It kind of carried like a legacy or like, you know, an image with it that, you know, all you had to do. I read an article I thought was funny. All a pirate had to do was place his hand on his sword and everyone would back down.
Unless you have anything more to add, Craig, you let me know when I can go off the leash here.
Okay.
A little bit.
Well, one point I want to make is that Michael Triplett says that the Cutlass designed for close range, so it's superior to the broadsword. But I don't really understand why that matters if the knight is wearing armor and it will just bang off of it. So that's pretty irrelevant.
Yeah, it's just because the whole armor, the double-edged sword had a nice point at the end, and it could be pushed through armor, stabbing essentially. And then once the world transitioned to no armor, everyone just kind of switched to the cutting single-edged sword. So yeah, it's probably useless against armor.
Yeah. So, which I guess they make sure not to test. So just to describe the test, then we'll let Matt go off.
Okay.
Josh Paw cuts a charging pig in half where clearly they're stitching two shots together. Like, he must have fucked up the first time. But
I wrote that there's like a terrible editing error.
Yeah.
It's clearly he doesn't swing at it.
Yeah. And I guess the pig on the wire is supposed to be like charging on horseback, but like the pirate doesn't charge on horseback. And the pirate tests it the same way. But again, the pig doesn't have armor. So the test is completely pointless because if you're really trying to reenact a knight on horseback, why not give it armor?
Yeah.
Like,
I want to know the guy, if he's out there, please write in the show, the guy who throws the pig down the chain. That's one of the characters I want to know more about. Like, it's him in red shirt.
Spotted.
Is that our invite per a show?
Yep.
Guy who hangs the pigs.
please leave a comment if you're the guy.
He's the one who throws it.
Yeah, if you throw the pig, please.
And don't don't lie. We watch the comments. Don't lie about being the guy that
Don't
throws the
say you're the pig guy if you're not the pig guy. I want the pig guy right in.
Yeah. Don't say you're the pig guy when you're not the pig guy. Tell the truth.
32.
So, Matt, I'll kick this over to you.
All right, thank you. This is like the part of the episode that pisses me off the most. Like, this test is so stupid. It's the one weapon that the knight uses. They spend 2 minutes on it. It's the dumbest test ever, and then they just call him even, which makes no sense. So, like, why is the broadsword not tested with a shield? A broadsword would be used in tandem with a shield. Let's talk about that for a second.
Now there's no shield, and it would increase how much armor there is by, I don't know, at least twofold.
Yeah, like we see in all the reenactments and in the final reenactment that the knight has a shield. They never mention it once in any of the testing. They don't mention it. They don't test it against anything. So yeah, that's it. And then they never test the cutlass against armor or a shield, and I don't know why. They're just like, yeah, both these swords can kill. And even with what we do see, this might just be operator error. But like the broadsword cuts a pig clean in half and the cutlass just kind of opens the pig up.
I think that's operator error.
Yeah.
I think he does a swing halfway through the pig and only cuts half the pig.
Yeah. So I am not make no mistake, I'm not calling into question the capabilities of the cutlass. I'm sure if you got cut with a cutlass, as its name says, you're getting cut. But from what we see and from what doesn't get tested, like, I don't understand how this is called even or why it's called even. It's not even to like make the edges even, because the pirates already got an advantage at this point. I don't understand. I just don't get it. And I don't know why we don't see a shield at all. Like, what happened with this episode? They spend so much time having Josh Paw talk about like how a knight fights for God and a pirate is just a dirty heathen thief, which is all useless. Useless drivel, doesn't mean anything. Like, they're just trying to set up a rivalry between these two guys. And then they take 2 minutes to cover the knight's broadsword. Like the only weapon in this episode that a knight actually would use. It drives me insane. There, grievance relievance done. I was pissed off about it.
I'm glad that made a comeback. The grievance relievance.
Yeah.
I just had the same thing, just to echo what Matt said, that the cutlass isn't tested against armor. And that's the whole point of the broadsword being a heavier sword, a double-edged sword, is to be used against armor. The cutlass is a sword that's around when people aren't using armor anymore. It wouldn't be effective against armor. And then furthermore, pirates wouldn't be trained in those sword fighting. Those sword fighting styles completely went away when armor went away. So the cutlass is completely useless against armor, and they just neglect to mention that. I think the test is stupid. I agree with everyone.
To call these weapons even at short range, even is the rarest edge example. That even is usually something they only give to like gun, because it's like, hey, both these guns could kill you. They call it even between not only two swords, but they just say like the knight and the pirate are even at close range. And to me, the entire paradigm of this like fight is that the pirate needs to kill him at long range or he's going to get skewered because of the armor. And I just found it so mind boggling that they spent so little time on it and like hardly tested it at all and didn't even mention like, hey, just swing this cutlass at this steel plate. Like, nah.
Yeah, they just disregard it. And I guess on the topic of armor, talk about the boarding axe real quick. It is one of like the most out of place tests on the entire show. I don't know if it was just to counter the fifth weapon of the armor, or they're just like the pirate needs some sort of counter, or they thought that the knight or the pirate was screwed, and so they're like, just give them this to maybe get through the armor. And then the results came back, and they were like, oh fuck. So it's just a very out of place. It's almost like not even categorized as short range, because I think they give the edge before they introduce the boarding axe. So the boarding axe, 10 to 12 inches, 10 ounces, was made of wood with a steel blade. And the test, it penetrates the helmet but doesn't pierce the skull. And Jeff says that the expert missed the pressure mat, so they got inaccurate reading, but they don't bother to redo the test. So that's I guess.
Go ahead.
I just love in the Michael Triplett hands it to David Hernandez. David Hernandez holds it up like Thor's hammer or something. He has this magic weapon. There's like the big counter. This is gonna be the the pirate's thing that just destroys the knight. He's like, here it is. I have the hidden weapon, and it's like, oh, it doesn't go through.
And you can see they give the weight of the boarding axe, and it's like 11 ounces or something like that. I'm like, so this thing is the lightest weapon we've seen, and that's gonna be the big the armor buster, like not the literal cannon that the pirate's bringing.
Yeah, Lucas, did they use this as a weapon or?
This one is kind of like a toss-up for me. I think if it was a different matchup, this would have been an underrepresented weapon. I do have my little one right here. I brought my axe with me today. I brought one of every weapon. What the boarding axe essentially was, it was used by the pirates. It was their Swiss Army knife, essentially. The pirate ship was full of quote unquote boarding axes. It was what they used essentially to cut ropes, cut unarmored people, it was used as like a throwing weapon too. It's very similar to a tomahawk, which, they're very deadly. I don't know, against armor, probably not that deadly, but it was essentially a ship tool first, and it was a backup weapon, but most pirates did carry an axe on their side, and it was kind of like a last resort. Boom, you missed with your pistol. What do you got left? You got an axe that you use for work on your side. The end of it was very, very sharp, and I do think it would punch through armor if you got enough swing in it, but at that point, you're probably also dead. So I don't think against the knight it's a very good weapon, but I think against maybe like another unarmored opponent or against another pirate, it's a very effective weapon. But it was essentially like a day-to-day tool that everyone just carried with them.
An e-tool, if you will.
An e-tool.
We are not on that episode yet.
But the real
all roads lead back to Green Beret.
The real warfare that it was used for, whenever enemies were boarding your ship and they were throwing lines over, they used their boarding axes. Why it got that name is to cut like the ropes of the enemies so they can't, like when they're trying to swing over your boat or grapple onto your boat, they would use it to cut the ropes or as like a last resort weapon.
I think it's stupid that the pirate just gets an extra weapon. Like they match it up against the knight's plate armor, but the knight's plate armor is not getting any kills in the sim. And if we stick to our original theory, which is that the sim does not judge weapon by weapon, but judges just based on the range of the kill. Because remember, we talked about the Kestis and Scissor just being like a total of 50, so they just split it in half. This is an also close range weapon. So how much you want to bet that like the results we see are the Cutlass and boarding axe combined, and they just like chose an arbitrary number to give to the boarding axe and the Cutlass.
Because how does he choose which one to use?
Right.
It should just be 0.
Yeah. So I wrote in my notes, I was like, it's unfair that they give the pirate an extra weapon at close range. The whole point was to give the pirate something that penetrates the knight's armor, and it failed badly at that. So why use it at all? And why do they use it? Why do they film it and put it in the show? Like, just edit it out.
Put a proper black powder load into the blunderbuss,
right?
And you have no need for any of the other pirate weapons.
Yeah,
or just use a blunderbuss. Period.
100%, 100% kill rate.
Knight versus blunderbuss. Yeah, so they give the edge to the armor. I don't even see how anyone can disagree with this because it's an anti-armor weapon and it doesn't penetrate the armor. Yeah. So there is no scenario where it's going to win. So edge armor.
Yeah, obviously. I just wanted to throw in real quick. There was a cool video called Mobility in Plate Armor by the YouTube channel Concork, CONNCORK, Concork. And it was really cool to see like how little plate armor actually hindered a knight. Like you were very mobile in it. So
it was, but it weighed a lot, and that guy he runs real quick and then he's out of breath.
No doubt it hinders your movement compared to not being armored, but to think that the knight couldn't be able to move around in the battle, I mean, it was just impressive to me, that's all.
Yo, but when he trips and then the pirate puts the flintlock pistol in his face visor and kills him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's badass.
So that is one of my favorite endings to like a recreation simulation. It's so dumb.
Yeah, leading it.
I was gonna say, I just love, I guess we'll get to it, but then when the pirate's at the beach and he sees his ship, he's so happy, but he turns and sees the night coming down, he's like, oh, for the love of it. It's like one of my favorite scenes.
Best Jack Sparrow impression. Yeah, I guess getting into the conclusion reenactment. So, as we said before, they pick the skeeviest looking dude to play the pirate. I mean, I guess he's doing a good job because I'm like disgusted by this guy.
I've seen pictures of that guy on IMDb, what he normally looks like. He's a very handsome man. They just like scrub him up for the pirate.
Hey, let's get him on here. Let's get him on the podcast.
If you're the skeevy looking dude, comment below. But
don't say you're the skeevy dude. We know if you're lying. We want the real skeevy dude and the real pig guy. Don't lie. Don't be a liar.
He has a lot of personality, and that's translated into the Deadliest Warrior video game, what he brings, I think, to the pirate. So
yes.
But there's a funny editing gag. So after the pirate lights the Granada with his blunt, he throws it at the knight, and the knight falls down. And they do a little explosion effect, and the rock, whatever they use for the Granada, falls to the ground. You can see the grass moving as it hits the ground, but there's no object there. So they didn't like. I think there's probably an easy way to fix that, but they just did not care. They just left the grass moving with an invisible object, and then the knight's like rolls over, and he's clearly being stopped by something, or like you could tell it's edited out.
And then my favorite part happens. The knight falls off the horse and rolls over, and there's a conveniently placed crossbow there already loaded.
That's like all of the knight's weapons are just lying around for him to pick up at some point. Because like he wouldn't be able to carry all of that.
He's just like, this is OSP. But yeah, so that's funny. And speaking of the editing, this is my grievance relievance. This has some of the worst B-roll footage of any Deadliest Warrior episode. There's so many like times it cuts the footage that is just the color balance is just way off, or it's super overexposed, or like just looks so bad. Like they got it back and they were like, oh fuck, and like they didn't bother to try to save it at all.
Yeah, all the medieval stuff looks like it's got the Zack Snyder filter on it.
Yeah,
there's one part that I love. Like there's a knight guy and they're doing some reenactment, and he's literally wearing like an off your stove like saucepan on his head as a helmet. It looks so. I'm gonna find the screenshot.
We gotta put that screenshot.
We're gonna put it in right here.
Please, so I don't have to find it myself.
I will find it. Yeah, I mean, it's not really a saucepan.
Like the lady Viking in the last episode.
It's not really a saucepan, but it's pretty funny.
I love all the B-roll of the Crusades, and in my opinion, I mentioned it before, they look like they're wearing pajamas with a red cross on it. They're not even wearing like chainmail or armor or anything. They're just wearing like their pajamas.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot something I wanted to address. That it's my grievance relievance for this episode.
Okay.
He hits the dummy with the flail, and he goes, "That did 1,300 psi of damage." What does that mean? Damage. What is 1,300 psi of damage?
Especially since that sensor went flying as soon as it hit the.
It's off the chart.
But don't forget, the Spartan shield did 45
that
Gs.
Was 100 Gs, of course.
Also, with the flail, he completely misses the head. If you watch, the chain hits the head and the ball at the end hits the back.
Yeah.
I don't understand why they didn't take like a better edit where he actually hits it, but I guess they're running low on gel torsos. They don't grow on trees.
That's true. They are like, we looked online, they're like $2,000 or $3,000 for a torso.
Yeah.
So not cheap.
We need to set up like a Patreon solely so people can help us get a gel torso.
Yeah, for the set.
Lucas can test his cutlass on it.
I will do it. I will test my weapons. I have pretty much every weapon I represent. I have something stupid that I could bring in as I'm surrounded by my pirate weapons today.
Yeah, we have a P.O. box set up where you can send your gel torsos. Comment if you have one, and we'll let you know what our address is.
It's the street is Jamal Street. We'll give you the rest later.
Yeah. So into the stats. So tough loss for the night. It is 629 kills for the pirate to 371 for the knight. Ooh. So let me just real quick go through each of the kills. For the knight, the Morning Star got 54. The crossbow got 106. The Halberd got 108, and the broadsword got 103, but it wasn't enough. The pirate, the Granado, got 198, which is almost double any of the night weapons. Flintlock got 51. The Cutlass got 25, which again, how did it get any kills? And the boarding axe got 13, which again, nonsensical. And and the Blunderbuss got 352, which is almost the Knight's entire kill count. So some questions, the Granado and the Blunderbuss alone won it for the pirate. Lucas, what the hell happened?
I mean, that's what it boils down to. This is gunpowder versus armor. And, to everyone else who disagrees, gunpowder wins. That was my point that I was going to bring up at the end here, that cut out all the other pirates' weapons. He doesn't need them. Just do the Granado and the Blunderbuss, and that wins it alone right there. I think the Blunderbuss was even underrepresented. It's a shotgun. It's pretty much like an older shotgun. I mean, that's all you need. It really is. But honestly, that's what's really great about this show. I was really looking forward to this episode. The whole gunpowder versus armor, the knight versus pirate debate. This was a really fun episode, I feel like. And it, a little bit of back and forth really made this one. But I mean, everyone knows where I stand. I think the Blunderbuss pretty much was the only weapon the pirate needed this time. And it's a wrap.
Yeah, I guess we can get into final thoughts. Lucas, was that pretty much what you had to say?
Yeah, I mean, I could fill in here and there at the end, but that's pretty much like the gist of this episode for me. I remember really enjoying it when I was a kid. I supported the pirate, and then doing the research, and then, the Knight's weapons, some of them didn't even exist, and they barely covered the ones that did exist. And then, it just made me support the pirate even more.
Yeah. Mike, let's hear your final thoughts.
All right. I have to say, Lucas did a great job researching everything. He's actually, more than the show or any other research, he actually brought me around to the pirate a little bit. However, it still just bothers me because the Knight's main weapon is a lance, and the lance isn't there at all. I guess on foot, if they explain the Knight's on foot, he's not using his horse, which in the reenactment, he's on a horse, mind you.
And has a shield.
He would just run the Knight pirate down regardless.
Yeah,
that's
well,
another
let me
thing.
interrupt real quick too, just bring up a point. Maybe they just wasn't advanced enough in the show. They didn't have the budget. But the Mongols, they're like, well, horseback is a big part of their fighting style. Let's get them on a horse and test weapons on a horse. The Knights should have been on a horse.
Yeah, season 2, they do a lot of testing on horseback, and season 1, they just don't. And I definitely think that's a budget and a scope thing.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, then they could have brought in a pirate cannon and shot a horse with
Jesus.
I would love that.
Continue with
no
your,
horses were hurt in the recording of this podcast. Yeah, my grievance relievance for this is just that two big things is the lack of a shield. Because if the pirate has to shoot through the shield, then through the armor, it's not going to get through both, even with the Blunderbuss. And then also, if you pay attention, they clearly state that the armor they're using is iron armor, but in the entire time, narrator's the Knight used a steel plate armor. And I was like, well, that's just not fair at all. You're going to test a weaker metal do all these tests on a weaker metal. With this shield and the steel armor, I don't think the Blunderbuss is as effective. And in their own test, they make the Blunderbuss look worthless because it's misfiring 1 out of 2 times, whatever you want to say. Either way, it's not good. With their own test, it looks like the Knight should win. And then if you actually put the Knight on the horse with a lance and a shield, he's still going to win because he's so much faster. He's just going to run that pirate down.
So in the Mike Dooley sim, do you still think that the Knight would win?
He wants to say yes. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, I still think the Knight wins.
Mike, I wouldn't be ashamed about that, because even though I think most of the guys at this table are probably pirate truthers. I think that this episode in particular is very controversial, and I think you would find a lot of allies online that do say that the Knight gets cheated in this episode.
It is a heated debate online from what I've seen.
Yeah. I've noticed on the old forums, this is a controversial one. Not quite as controversial as when our beautiful troops lose in a couple episodes, but this was a controversial one, and I think it's for a lot of the reasons you state, Mike, that the way the episode is presented, Pirate doesn't look that capable, and then the Blunderbuss turns around and gets 350 kills.
I think they downplay the pirate a lot, and I think they downplay the Blunderbuss a lot, just to kind of bring him down, sorry, Mike, to the Knight's level. But if you look up real videos of a Blunderbuss firing, they were testing it against modern day armor on Demolition Ranch. I mean, that's pretty scary. The plates that we wear, the American military wears now, and they were shooting against that. It's a very, very powerful weapon. Black powder is very powerful. I think it was very underrepresented on the show.
So you have Mike in the camp of, well, the real knight would have won hands down, and Lucas is like, well, the real pirate, after she gave him all his stuff, would have won hands down. So
The real black powder weapons are better.
So,
yeah,
at the end of the day, the knight would have just like snuck into the pirate's house while he's sleeping and killed him in his
I was
sleep.
waiting.
So it doesn't matter what this stupid simulation says.
I was waiting for someone to reference that the whole time.
the knight would have been just like, he would have been like moving around.
Would have been moving around.
Yeah. So Matt, you want to say your piece?
Yeah, I for the most part agree with the results. Like based on what we saw, the Granado and the Blunderbuss carry the pirate to victory. I don't think you can argue with that. They were the two most effective weapons. I think they would have been very effective against the knight. I do want to say, is it Michael Triplett says, we won because our tactics work. Wrong, Michael. You won because you had a grenade and a shotgun.
A shotgun is why you won.
Yeah. It had nothing to do with what is a pirate tactic anyway. Besides like throwing sand in somebody's face.
One pirate tactic that is still used in the military today is being an alcoholic. Lucas can attest to this. Being a crippling alcoholic is definitely in use in the military nowadays. So
I can defend that.
Absolutely true.
I can defend that. Whenever pirates would take to seas, the water, the barrels, and everything that they'd keep it in would commonly start growing mold and get infected. And their way of fighting against that, the navies of the actual, England, France, and Spain would start issuing the ships. It was like 5 shots of alcohol per person per day to fill in for the water. And that's what became grog. And the pirates famously added lemon and sugar to it in these barrels, and it would prevent pretty much any bacteria from growing in the water. So I don't know how hydrating that would be, but that was their way of staying healthy and preventing scurvy on the seas.
Yeah, this is coming from the two former and active military members in the podcast. So save your comments.
I do want to say real quick that the last thing I wanted to say about this episode is it's one of my favorite episodes of all time in the show, and is probably one of the few times Deadliest Warrior shines as a legitimate concept. I think for the most part, this show is very silly, and so it's hard. I mean, people get on whether they like a warrior or not, and they get upset, but it's sort of hard to argue about the results because the show is just kind of arbitrary and goofy. This is one test where you could see it going either way.
Yeah.
And they can test something very concrete. Can a flintlock gun, a primitive gun, go through the top of the line steel plate armor, right? That to me is a really interesting idea. And the only thing I don't like about this episode is that they spend so little time actually trying to test that. They test the Granado one time against armor, the Flintlock one time, and the Blunderbuss one time against armor. And I really wish they had done more tests of that, because this is the one of the only instances where Deadliest Warrior can actually answer a real actual question with evidence, and they dropped the ball a little bit, but it is an entertaining episode.
They need to spend more time on the boarding act.
Yeah. So I'll give my piece. I'll be quick because I'm sure we're over our time limit. And I thought it was going to be more controversial, but apparently not. And this is my final thoughts. No one can say anything. Mike, this is my final word, so no one can say anything in response. So I thought it was going to be more, like I said, controversial in opinion, but Matt pretty much nailed what I was going to say. I think this is one of the best matchups in the entire show, because really you can mentally go back and forth. Like, well, the knight's more trained. Well, the pirate has gunpowder, but if you have gunpowder and you're untrained, does that really mean anything? And that kind of friction is what makes this episode so interesting. So as for the thesis, I mean, it's pretty clear. It's armor versus primitive guns would be more powerful, and they say that the guns would win. But as a concept, yes, this is the few times you see a matchup and you're like, I wonder what would happen. Now, fast forward to Saddam Hussein versus Pol Pot. It's a little bit of a different story. I don't know if anyone in a bar has really asked themselves that question, but we'll get to that. But yeah, I think this is a great matchup, and everyone's heated feelings about it are evidence of that.
Feel free to get heated in the comments. Yeah, keep it respectful. We want
I don't care. I don't give a shit if you're respectful. I just want to see some fucking blood.
I'm almost sad this episode's over. I was looking forward to this for so long.
Yeah. This is a good one. I really like
As long as you don't lie about being Pigman in the comments, let it go.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Your ass is out.
Just be nice to me. If
Yeah.
you see me in the comments, be nice to me.
Don't be nice to me. I don't give a fuck.
Hey, folks, I heard a rumor that I have actually got my hands on the sim that they use in the show, and we got some videos coming up real soon that you're going to enjoy.
Yeah.
We're going to be running the sim while we commentate over it.
Right.
See who really is the deadliest.
Yeah, I hacked into the High Tech Fight Club and I found the sim, and you're gonna see the real sim very, very soon.
Can we just like have an hour video of the game of people like getting killed by the Granado and they just turn into limbs?
If you haven't seen it yet, we got the real sim. I got it.
It's not that. I do want to get footage of us playing Deadliest Warrior, the game. I think that'd be fun to do. But maybe as like a season 1 wrap up celebration. But this is the actual sim that you'll see. So, I guess to kind of close out, one thing I'll say is an underrated part of Deadliest Warrior that I just kind of remembered a moment ago. I loved at the end of at least season 1, not knowing what the next episode was, and then during the credits they'd be like, next episode, the Yakuza, and you'd be like, oh shit, they're doing this, and you tell everybody at school. Yeah, so that was a super fun part. Obviously the show's like 10 years old or something, so you guys know what the next episode is. I am very excited to bring you guys Yakuza versus Mafia, although I guess it's not just me, there's other people too.
Hey, I'm walking over here.
Yeah, we're gonna try to keep the Italian accents to a minimum.
Don't worry, I got just as many crappy problems.
Gabagool!
Yeah.
I'm just ready for the Gabagool next episode. I'm really looking forward to that.
Make an appearance. So I want to thank Mike for being our first remote guest, joining us. Hoping to have some more of these.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for serving on Cairo Station. Give the Covenant back their bomb.
I think they're boarding right now. I mean, they may need to go find a weapon.
Yeah. So thank you, Mike, for joining us. I'm sure we'll be on a future episode. But another one has anything else to add?
Seriously, thank you everyone who's been watching this. We've been seeing you on YouTube. You know, we've been getting a couple hundred views, and we've had some people comment on pretty much every episode so far. We're really enjoying doing this. We want to keep bringing you every episode, and just thank you for watching.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to have low expectations, and the first time one of our podcasts crossed 100 views, I'm like, holy shit, this is what it feels like. And now our Apache versus Gladiator is like almost over 300.
That's insane.
Which is for us, it is insane. And to see people that we don't know commenting and actually listening to it is crazy. Yeah,
thank you guys. Love you.
Yeah. Love you guys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you guys next time for Deadliest Warrior, Yakuza versus Mafia. Woo!
What you doing, man? You're making pork chops.